Okay. Okay. You think we're ready? All right. And Marvin, are you there? Cannot hear you if you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Dope.
Sick. All right. Well, after managing a little bit of tech issues here, we were able to get things started. So I guess for those of us who are joining, I presume you have the co-stream going.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. So without further ado, welcome to Talking as a Free Action, the D&D DM focused podcast where you are brought, with your hosts. Here are Owen and my co-host here.
Marvin.
And yeah, we're gonna talk D&D. No guests today. Important to note. So I will go ahead and update that actually, because funny thing about that. So no guests today, but we do have some pretty awesome topics lined up for today. So with that, no sponsors either. If you're listening, sponsors, hit me up. Um, so so yeah, what topics do we have lined up today, man?
So our first topic today is going to be determining ability scores at the beginning of the campaign. Um, Rolling stats or point buy or standard array, and the pros and cons of each, and our personal preferences. And then our second topic will be about staying in character
Yeah,
and whether or not you should stay in character all the time.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and then I guess to a lesser extent, how those stats kind of inform the roleplay itself. So without further ado, strap in. And if you haven't already, feel free to join the Discord. And if you're on Twitch, go ahead and give us a follow or a subscription, even. Helps us out. Or if you're on YouTube, you can do the same. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right in. So stats, man. Tell me, for your first campaign, how did you generate stats?
So the first campaign I played in and ran, we rolled 46, keep the three highest, which was, I think, pretty standard for Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 back in the day. And actually, I didn't know that there were other ways to generate ability scores until after I had started the campaign. Because I didn't read the DM guide or the player's handbook.
Huh. That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's really more emblematic. Like certainly more so the case. I think with fifth edition over 3.5, because I think with
Mm-hmm.
fifth edition you really don't need the DM guide. If you have the player handbook, but 3.5, I think it was a very different animal. You really did need the DMG in order to DM the game. I think.
Yeah, you did.
Um,
Didn't read it though.
yeah, tellingly, right? So maybe it's not as important as I initially said. For me, my first stat generation was everybody got an 18, and then everybody rolled 4 dice and could re-roll all ones. And
Okay.
the main reason for that is when I first played D&D for the very first time, it was at a convention,
Mm-hmm.
and we rolled for stats just like as it's supposed to be because it was basically Adventure League, and
Right.
it sucked, man. Like it sucked getting really low stats for a character that like especially in 3.5, like there are some classes that really need a pretty healthy spread across the board. So I
Yep.
always really like the idea of kind of starting with an 18, or at least I like the idea back in the day of starting with an 18 so that way everybody was always at least good at the thing their class was supposed to be good at, and then kind
Mm-hmm.
of ensuring that nobody was truly bad at anything in particular, at least not without some pretty incredible poor luck.
Yeah. For the most part, I actually definitely agree with that. Um, I've moved away from giving 18s, um, but I'm not opposed to it ever. I just think lower numbers make things more interesting.
Yeah, I think I've definitely changed my tune on it. You know, for a really long time, I was very much a big fan of like rolling for stats and kind of allowing that to go. I think
Hmm.
for where I am right now, I think my favorite method of generation has to be point buy, because it does a lot of the stuff that I liked about rolling for stats. In that it did create, like, at least the way that I initially generated stats, it does a lot of those same things. Where if you want to, your character will always be good at least the one thing that you're supposed to be good at. But
Hmm.
I like that it does come with kind of the trade off, so that every character is inherently kind of on the same playing field. Whereas that's not always the case if you roll for stats.
Yeah, I definitely don't roll for stats often anymore. Um, and like that's partially because I play systems that don't encourage rolling for stats. Um, because 5e you max out at 20, there's no reason to start every campaign with a 20 already. You don't grow as far as stats. And Pathfinder, there's no way to roll for stats in Pathfinder.
Oh, really?
Pathfinder 2e specifically, um, ability scores are generated entirely at your discretion based on point. It's almost like point buy, but you buy in increments of two,
Hmm.
and you can basically put them anywhere within the bounds of your character's uh, ancestry, race, and class.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, I know for me, like when it comes to point buy, I think that like it does initially come off as a bit complicated. So like I think that's
Hmm.
definitely a put off to it. And I know that there's like a ton of online calculators you can find to do it for you, but I think that that's part of it. So I like the idea of Pathfinder kind of simplifying it, so that way you don't end up with any feel bad situations where it's like, oh, I'm a new player and I accidentally gave myself all odd numbers.
Yeah, yeah. All odd numbers does not end well.
Yeah. Um, have you ever used any? Have you ever used the standard array for anything?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the 5e games that I have run, I've used the standard array, and right now, most of the time that I run Star Wars, I use a modified standard array.
Modified in what? Do you skew it higher or lower?
I generally skew higher. I feel like Star Wars feels better as a high power game.
Well, I don't think you need to sell that to me. Um, um,
uh, oh, hey, Fitz.
hey,
And
man.
Alvis. How's it going, guys?
Yeah, welcome in. Welcome in.
Fitz says he really likes the ogre battle method of getting stats. The character answers a set of multiple choice questions, and each answer has a plus to a stat and a minus to another stat.
That is really interesting. Also, get my
Yeah.
stream fits. Um,
Also, thanks for the compliments on the layout. Appreciate it, guys.
yeah, really appreciate it. We spent a lot of time kind of trying to make it look pretty. So,
My layout is slightly different from yours, Owen.
okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure you spend time making it look pretty too.
I did.
So there you go. Um, um, Yeah, that's a really interesting take on it, and I think that you could
Hmm.
almost do something similar with fifth edition. I think the way that fifth edition is set up is it kind of does the same thing, only instead of it just influencing your stats, the way that they kind of do like the background system and the sub race and things like that, all
Hmm.
kind of factor into your like stats and starting traits and stuff. So it's kind of similar in a way, but not exactly so direct of an influence on your stats directly.
Yeah, yeah. And I do like that. Uh, I actually really like the background system, and I like that more D20 systems are starting to implement it. It gives another layer to your character that you don't have to come up with on your own.
Yeah, I think it just adds like like if you tell somebody to build a character backstory, it's really difficult to pull that out of the aether. Whereas I think that like having a background system in place does help you kind of give you like a starting crystal to build
Hmm.
off of. So I do like that aspect of the system for sure. So I know we're going to get this question at some point if we don't answer it either in the comments of the videos or in chat. But how do you feel about the Tasha's change to racial stats? Well, if you want to call it a
I
change.
actually haven't read Tasha's, so I have no idea what that change is.
Okay, so I guess for you and the viewers, if you aren't aware, in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they basically introduced a variant rule where you could swap out any racial modifier on any race for any other racial modifier, provided that it was equivalent, basically. So if your race comes with an inherent +2 to intelligence and a +1 to Constitution, you could swap it out for a +2 to anything and a +1 to anything. The logic being that not every race, like the logic being that like there can be unique individuals who are more naturally talented towards things that the race maybe typically isn't known for. So you can have an abnormally intelligent dwarf or a abnormally charismatic kobold, for instance.
Hmm. Um, I like that actually. Like, I understand that for the most part, as far as D&D is concerned, we want archetypes and kind of wanting to play certain races a certain way.
Hmm.
But maybe you want to be a dwarf just for flavor, and you want to be a genius.
Yeah.
Like, I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of I saw a lot of pushback online from people that I don't necessarily agree with because I also was really much a big fan of it. A lot of people
Hmm.
who were very much up in arms that like, well, you're changing the way that the races are. If you change the stats, then what's the point of any of it? And like, I think that's kind of a reductive take.
I mean, it's not like the ability scores are the only thing that a race gives you.
Yeah,
You have your sub race, you have your racial feats, um, and again, you have flavor. That's the main reason to pick a race, really. Um, like you just want to be a mountain dwarf.
yeah, it's just how it is. The other thing about Tasha is that like they're trying to get, and Tasha's and like WotC in general are trying to get away from like some of those racial stereotypes that the system is kind of played into for a really long time. I think
Hmm.
that like with like the changes to Strahd, for instance, with some of the NPCs that were portrayed as kind of gypsy stereotypes that
Hmm.
have in the updated version of the modules have been updated to lean less into that kind of stereotypes and more into like its own fictional culture. So things like that, and also the idea that like the races should not be classified as inherently evil. Because I think that the way that you read some of the racial descriptions, both of creatures as well as the races in the book itself, it paints with a really broad brush.
Hmm.
Even like the way that it describes like dwarves or elves, for instance, it's like, oh, dwarves are are highly regimented, and it's like, are they all really that way though? Like that, it feels really close to painting with painting them as a stereotype. And
Yeah.
I think that's helpful for I think that's helpful for giving players an idea on like what the original author's kind of intent was behind the races, but the reality is that when you're DMing a campaign, these things can be anything that you want them to be anyways. They don't
Hmm.
have to be that way. If you want to run a society where it's just a bunch of hedonist dwarves who, use belts of gender bending in order to have, crazy sex parties, you can do that, and that totally is okay for the flavor of that particular world. This is a campaign I played in. Um, so,
Oh Lord.
um, so like you can do that, and that's not contrary to like what dwarves are. You can make that be a thing for dwarves. So I really like the idea
Hmm.
that WotC is kind of endorsing DMs to really take more of a hands-on approach with kind of the flavor that they use,
Hmm.
and really kind of trying to encourage DMs to think more outside the box, and players to a lesser extent too. King Flink says loose use of "that's okay." Um, I mean, let's
uh,
just say it wasn't the only thing that was loose in that campaign. So
Oh.
um, yeah. So that being said, moving past that particular nugget of information, yeah, Bastion remembers that story. Um,
Soto says that he loves what Tasha did. It lets any race excel in any class, and I 100% agree with that.
yeah, and the crazy thing too is that it doesn't have to be strictly to make your like. I think one, it's good because it means that you have more build options, which are always really cool,
Mm-hmm.
and you can also play it to the opposite. Maybe you do play a paladin that a paladin half orc or something that is not very charismatic. Like maybe you play into the normal racial stereotypes. Hey KGB. Speaking of belts of gender bending, I was
Oh
just meant.
Lord,
You can guess who DM'd that campaign. Um, so,
I didn't expect anybody else.
um, yeah. So I think that it's good just for opening up people's eyes because I think that there is a fair number of people um, who read through Tasha's, and they say to themselves, "Oh, I didn't consider that I could do that." Even though that was always in the rules before, the DM could always do that.
Yeah,
It opened their mind to the possibility.
and sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, so definitely huge thumbs up there for me. Big endorsement of that. Um, Not a huge fan of the summon spells in the book, gotta be honest, but that's probably a topic for another day. Um, uh, so yeah, I think that's that. I think that with that in place, though, I do enjoy the point buy, but I don't begrudge anybody for using either of the other two. I think it really just kind of matters on what you want your campaign to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess along that lines, I did have a question for you. How do you choose
Sure.
which one of those generation methods for a campaign? Let's say you're sitting down to plan a campaign before session zero. How do you choose which one you want to do?
Oh, mostly it depends on the power level that I'm trying to achieve in the campaign. And of course, that can change at session zero after talking to the players. Um, but usually, it's based on the power level that I think will be best for the story that I'm going to tell.
Okay, so like if you're looking for like a high fantasy, like save the world kind of adventure, if you want the players to feel very powerful, you would lean towards what exactly?
I would lean towards either a a role um, with a lots of rerolls, like roll four dice, reroll ones and twos, um, or an array that I generate, and I just give them numbers that I think are high or skew in the high direction. Like if I want like high power level, I'll give everyone an 18, 16, uh, 15, 14, 13.
And so if you're looking for a campaign, I guess that is the opposite of that, where you want the players to feel like not helpless, but in danger. You would skew the other way.
Uh, that is when I skew towards point buy and the standard array because those, to me at least, already feel lower power.
Well, I guess just because they don't have the potential of creating like really powerful characters.
Yeah, you can't. Most of the time, you don't start with an 18 with the standard array. And point buy, you have to take some losses to your other stats to have an 18.
So I guess if you're running that kind of campaign, how do you reconcile the difference between a character who maybe got really lucky and rolled like multiple 18s versus the player who doesn't? Like, because one of the things that I've always been concerned about is like the potential of players feeling like resentment almost towards their fellow party member
Mhm.
for their fortune at session zero. Um, so like, have you ever experienced that before?
I haven't personally, and that mostly comes down to the temperament and the outlook of the players that I generally have. Most of them will be happy for the other players rather than upset that their stats weren't as good.
Hmm.
So I've never actually had to deal with that in a campaign that I was running. Um, but I have seen it in campaigns that I've played in. Um, and I actually have no idea how those DMs dealt with those players.
Hmm. Well, I guess the question is, let's say you are running a campaign and you have a player who comes to you and says, "Hey, like, John here rolled, 3 18s, and like that's great for him, but like my character is basically non-functional because my highest stat is a 14 before racial modifiers, like by
Um,
comparison."
I mean, in that situation, I would just let them re-roll the whole stat line. Um, because if I want the game to be higher powered, I'm not going to let their highest stat be a 14 as the DM. Um,
So, so I guess maybe a possible option is, have you considered maybe doing like a total points where it's like after you generate your stat, because like I've heard this before too, right? So after you roll your dice normally, after you
mhm.
generate your stats, you total all of them up, and if the stat points total less than like 60, let's say, then you can re-roll the whole array.
I've seen that. Um, like my problem with that in this specific situation is straight 14s will be more than 90.
Yeah, well, I mean, like it doesn't have to literally be 60, but I'm saying you could select the number based on the power level that you're looking for.
I mean, yeah, but again, if let's say for example my number is 90 and two characters have two 18s and one has six 14s,
Mhm.
like I'm not going to say that the player with 14s is shit out of luck, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely. I don't know. It's tough because you're trying to reconcile that like feeling of jealousy, I guess, and I guess maybe the only way that you can really do that is by talking to the player directly and just like kind of like I don't ever want to tell a player like, hey, maybe you should reconsider your character concept, but or reconsider your role in the party as a consequence of the stats that you roll. But I do think that having high stats is not the only thing that's important when it comes to your character generation. In fact, it's one of the least important things in my opinion. Um, as far as like making your character effective, unless you're running unless you're playing in a very like combat focused campaign, I think, or you're playing with a DM who really puts a lot of emphasis on like skill checks, things like that that do require mechanical rolls pretty frequently.
Mhm.
Um, because you could definitely run like a political intrigue campaign, and your character who has relatively mediocre stats in a lot of areas can still be really effective in that campaign, depending on how the DM runs that table. So I think that you as the DM also needs to be kind of aware on what your style is and whether or not that player
Mhm.
is going to feel overly penalized for something that was ostensibly outside of their control.
I agree. But if I'm this is just me again, if I'm rolling for stats, stats are going to be important to the campaign, at least from my point of view as the DM, because like I want a higher power game usually.
Hmm.
So like at that point, you kind of just have to give everybody a fair shot, and sometimes that just means um, and King Flink actually does this a lot in his D20 based games,
Hmm.
where you can roll your stats, and everybody knows beforehand that they can roll two sets of stats and keep the one they like better.
Okay. I mean, that kind of mitigates, I guess, some of the randomness, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
instead of re-rolling ones, for instance, like you just straight up have advantage on your stat rolls, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's not like strict 1-to-1 where you're rolling each stat twice. It's you either keep one array or the other array.
Yeah, you do the straight six, and then you do another straight six, and you keep the first one or the second one. And he'll have reroll ones and twos in addition to that sometimes. So like that's one way to go.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a way to do it. I think that the real like takeaway is at the end of the day, you need to know what kind of campaign you want to run.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to inform a lot of your decision making, and be aware of the temperament of the people that you're playing with.
Yeah.
Because if you have people who are going to be jealous, maybe don't do the stat generation method that's random. Maybe if you know that you have players who are prone to that kind of behavior or that kind of um,
Mentality.
mentality. Yeah, I was looking for the word mentality. Then maybe just having a standard array would be best. King Flink says high
Um,
power campaign is the only way to go. No one is jealous because everyone is powerful.
um, unless everybody just gets the same numbers, then nobody's powerful.
The funny thing about that comment, though, is that having high stats does not necessarily make your campaign high power. Like, having high stats can be really helpful in that respect, but I think that like your character's power level is relative to the NPCs and things that they interact with. So you could have a relatively low stat character, but if they're always interacting with commoners on a regular basis, they're gonna be pretty high power by comparison just by a function of their heroic classes.
That's true. But I look at it from like a monster manual perspective. Like, if you're gonna take a CR4 monster and put it up against 4 level 4s, will they have a reasonable chance at beating it in a high power campaign? They'll destroy it statistically, and in a lower power game, they'll have a real challenge. You
Hmm.
know, and that's kind of how I look at power levels, not necessarily relative to the world, because a lot of times I want the players to feel powerful compared to most of the world, anyways.
Hmm.
But if I'm taking something from the monster manual for them to fight in a high power game, I want to have to pick something that is a higher CR than the players.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, the CR isn't like super one to one anyways, so I think
Mm-hmm.
that always some level of adjustment's going to be required regardless. But I understand the kind of the mentality that you're going for, where you want to be able to say, okay, if I want to challenge my players, I don't want to. I want them to be able to take on monsters that are maybe a little bit above their weight class.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I think there's more than one way, of course, to get that without stat generation, though. I guess since we kind of skewed into talking about higher power campaigns in general. Um, so one method that I've done in almost all of my campaigns is just max HP, um, and kind of the same shtick, right? With rolling for stats, I don't like creating players who feel like their character is hamstringed because they've rolled a series of ones on their HP rolls, or a series
Yeah,
of twos even. And while some DMs I know will give the players the option of taking the average or rolling, um, and I find that if they're just going to take the average, they're going to. I feel like a lot of people are going to take the average a lot of the time, and even if they don't, kind of the same deal. Like if I pick a monster out of the monster manual, I want to be able to feel confident that it's going to be a decent fight. I don't want to run into a situation where you know an NPC upcasts some spell or whatever, and because this player happens to have a lower HP score due to their poor HP rolls, even though they're like the tanking character, they just get insta killed or whatever.
yeah, I think that's fair. Um,
What are some of
I
your
don't,
Go ahead.
I don't dislike max HP, but it's not something that like it's not something that I usually go to,
Hmm.
even though it's always an option I have in my head. I don't know. It never feels right for me when I'm the DM, at least.
Hmm.
But I definitely appreciate that it's a way to up the power level of the game a little bit without affecting stats. I do like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just gives the players more active rounds in combat, I guess.
Hmm.
Because, like, for my campaign that I run right now that you're a player in, um, I feel really comfortable throwing pretty significant threats at you guys, knowing that because you guys do have the most HP that you can for the levels that you took, that like realistically speaking, you guys can take a pretty significant pounding, even though like your character is multi-class to hell, for instance.
Yeah. Um, Granted, 5 of my levels are D8 or better dice, so
Still less than half. You're not even at 100 HP.
that. Yes, I am. I have 107.
Really? Okay. Well, my mistake
I'm
then.
currently at 90 something,
But still, 107 for a 13th level character is still pretty low.
but it's good for a wizard.
It is good for a wizard. I'll give you that. So, but by comparison, right, like the fighter in the group is like 150 or something, because like
Yeah,
half his
well,
levels are sorcerer. So,
only half.
yeah, he's actually pretty evenly split between Sork and fighter.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, so I guess with that we can say that. What are some other ways that you make a high power campaign outside of stats or HP?
Mm. Sometimes, and this is one of my real secrets here. If my players are experienced enough, they do everything for me. They just build powerful characters.
It's like I want to play a high power campaign. It just rolls up with a warlock paladin or whatever.
Yeah, like if I say to certain people, "Hey, come with a high power character, standard array," they'll show up and they'll deal 80 damage on the first round of combat at level 4.
That helps.
Yeah, like sometimes all I have to do is invite the right people. Um, I don't know. I don't really skew towards high power campaigns. Um, I like the standard array for the most part, as far as ability scores go.
Mhm.
Um, and like as I've said in previous episodes, my style for the most part doesn't focus heavily on combat, anyways.
Mhm.
So power levels relative, I would say, because combat doesn't mean a whole lot in most of my campaigns. You can, like I said, my players went 8 sessions without combat.
Yeah, and like for me personally, like I actually do enjoy the combat aspect of the game. Not all the
Mm-hmm.
time, but I do enjoy it. So like if I went 8 sessions without combat, I would want to know that going into the campaign, so that way when I'm building my character, I can build a character that has a little bit more meat to their bones, um, on the role play
Oh
aspect
yeah.
of it.
Oh yeah. Um, but again, one of my players is just he built a murder hobo. Like he's just straight up damage dealing. Um, Longbow. I think he shoots like 4 arrows a turn at level 5. Shoots 4 arrows a turn, and like a +6 to damage, like a +14 to hit.
Yeah, sharpshooter
Um,
is pretty nuts.
and like he's also like the most interesting out of combat just from his role play. So like he built a powerful character, but also is my favorite to see role playing.
Yeah, I guess that's maybe an important distinction is that like even though the characters are high power, that doesn't actually influence the role play all that much.
Mm-hmm.
Although, I guess we'll kind of segue into the next topic a little bit. That said, your stats I think should influence your role play at least on some level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're playing a fighter or whatever, and your intelligence is like a 12, you know, maybe you shouldn't be the character who's volunteering the super high level, puzzle solving abilities. I mean, puzzles are kind of a weird space because it's really more of a challenge to the players than the characters themselves, but your stats should inform some of your character's
You shouldn't
traits.
always be volunteering to make every knowledge check if your intelligence is 12.
Right, right, exactly. Or maybe a little bit more subtly, the way that like your character's wisdom should influence that their the way that they kind of have an outlook on the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this kind of goes towards the idea of like, okay, well, I have six stats. What do these things represent? Well, we have our, strength, dexterity, and constitution, which are our physical stats. And
Mm-hmm.
then the back three are the intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, which are the three that are going to influence your role playing, I think, the most. Um, with your intellect, of course, that's going to be how book smart the character is. You hear that all the time, but you don't always see what that kind of translates to. Um, Whereas, like, when you have, like, wisdom, wisdom is like street smarts, but it's a lot more than just that. It's, how in tune you are with your surroundings. It's, how aware you are that people may have motives that are beyond the words that they're saying, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, of course, charisma, which is kind of a catch-all for a lot of different things, but it's kind of, I think, a little bit of a force of personality kind of stat. At least that's the
Yeah.
way I kind of quantify it in my head. So, I think it's important to realize that if I'm playing a character who has, a really high intellect, if I don't also have a really high charisma, I would expect that character to, perhaps volunteer things that are like perhaps to come off as a bit of a know-it-all, for instance, or
Mm-hmm.
generally not have the social graces to know when to not try and outsmart the other people in the room or not make
Yeah.
themselves look smart. Um, that's where like that kind of array can go poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Or if somebody, has a really low wisdom, perhaps they are pretty good in conversations, but they're just really trusting, or they repeatedly put their foot in their mouth, right? Um,
Yeah.
we have a character like that in the party right now, where the wisdom's not quite as low as where it actually ends up getting represented, but the wisdom, just because you have a high wisdom doesn't mean that your character is good at all the things that are associated with wisdom. So maybe your character is just really observant, but you still kind of put your foot in your mouth a lot just because of your other character backstory, background traits, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Um, and low charisma, high wisdom will definitely put you in those situations where you're putting your foot in your mouth.
yeah. One that I thought was really interesting to play is have you ever played a high wisdom, low intelligence character?
I have not. No.
Because I think this comes up with like clerics a lot. Because intelligence is kind of a dump stat for clerics a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Not for me.
Not for you, Mister. I'm gonna do both wizards and clerics, but um, I think that character ends up coming off as a little bit more worldly.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who maybe values the like slower pace of the world around them, and maybe is not super in tune with. Like, I don't want to say they have like if they have like, let's say that we'll do both, right? Let's say low charisma, high charisma, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have low charisma, really high wisdom, and really low intelligence, and low intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
low being relative to like high intelligence characters, not necessarily like below standard. Like
Right.
I'm talking like 11 or 10, not like 6 or 8 or
Human
whatever.
average, not impressive.
Right, nor particularly unimpressive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're like a low charisma, high wisdom character, I think you have a lot of options for someone who comes off as perhaps very, very street smart, kind
Mm-hmm.
of is maybe really familiar with the way that like people work on the outside, the way that people actually are in the real world, but maybe is not particularly good at navigating some of those social situations. You could have
They
someone who,
won't always see
mm,
like they won't always notice when people are lying to them. They might know that like they're not being totally truthful, but they might not realize, hey, this person just straight up lied to me.
yeah, like I know, like on Critical Role, for instance, one of the players plays a character who's similar to that. Low charisma,
Mm-hmm.
relatively low intelligence, pretty high wisdom, And
Mm-hmm.
their character, the way they play that character, is very like lots of like anecdotes, like worldly anecdotes, and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really not that they don't notice things, but they just don't concern themselves with like politics and stuff like that. Like in fact, the one of the
Mm-hmm.
quotes the character says is like, "I'm just going to try a little bit of radical honesty here." Meanwhile, like the rest of the party is just a bunch of shitbags that lie all the time, and he's the one honest guy where he's like, well, "Why don't we just tell them the truth and see what happens?" You know. Um,
I
so
like that.
but I think that's a really interesting take on that style of stat array, right? Where it's like, I may not like know like the city streets very well, but I'm very
But you can
wise.
get places.
Yeah, and I'm very maybe wise in the way that I approach the world. I don't need much to be happy.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't dislike that.
Just an option. It's not the only way to play that array for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it's an effective way that you can go about that. Um, just keep a small notebook of like, analogies like the toad and the scorpion or something. So, so what are some? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I will say, I think strength, dex, and con can very much influence your roleplay too, though.
Mhm.
Because have you ever played high strength, high intelligence,
No,
low to medium, everything else?
no, but I really want to now.
So, like, imagine if barbarians took the time to think things through and realized that punching it was the correct solution.
So you're saying
Like,
someone?
instead of just go in and break the door down, you think about it and you're like, well, if I break the door here, it'll go this way. If I break it here, it'll go that way. And I want it to go that way. Because break the door down is still the right answer, either way, high intelligence, low intelligence. But how you break the door down now matters.
So I guess you could almost kind of put that analogous to. Seems like punching things with extra steps is what a near future industry says in my chat. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
That's all
kind of.
thinking is, extra steps to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's still. I think that's allowing your physical stats to kind of inform the problem, like the preferred problem solving, I guess. So, I guess in your example, you're saying that this is somebody who will still like think things through, is maybe still very cerebral, but instead they, um, sounds like Hulk when Hulk has control of his mental faculties. Yeah, kind of. Um, but I think because of your physical prowess, you may be skewed towards physical solutions as opposed to mental ones. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. But like a dex-based character isn't going to say, "Let's break the door down," and that's not going to be their main method of solving problems because problem solving is it's a big part of your role play. Even small problems are usually informed by your stats. High intelligence characters are usually going to try to think their way out of a problem, you know,
Hmm.
and they're gonna role play. Hey, I put a lot of thought into this, and maybe we should do this, this, and this. But if they don't have the other stats, they're not going to think I can do it. They're going to think we can do it.
I mean, I think that you could still get that character though, even without the high intellect. It's just a matter of leaning on the other people in your party more directly, right? Um, because like for the wizard that I play in my campaign, like she's especially
Hmm.
low strength. And she has like an 8, right? Um,
I know that feel.
so I have an 8 in strength, but I have two meatheads in my party and a monk.
Hmm.
Um, so like I am never short of like physical force to apply, and there are a lot of situations where I am the character who says, I think that we should apply our force in this particular way. Um, at least when it
That's
comes to
fair.
certain situations. So I think it just depends on the character itself. I think in your example, what you're describing is somebody who's more willing to kind of take charge of the situation and be the person who puts themselves in harm's way, as opposed to
Hmm.
maybe recognizing that I'm not the best tool for this job, which is I think what happens when I with my wizard character, for instance.
fair. I don't know, but like when I play Dex forward characters, I never think our solution should be to break the door down. You know, I think our solution should be pick the lock or climb through a window or something like that. And I rarely think, yeah, break it down is the right answer when I'm not strength forward.
Hmm. I wonder if that. I wonder what that looks like then. Like if you're playing like a high intellect, high dex character, for instance. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess somebody like an arcane trickster rogue,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess even like an archer character. Um, I think those characters are going to think maybe a little bit less linearly. Like I think that like when you consider intellect, it's kind of to me the idea of like solving out of the box, like coming up with novel solutions to problems.
Mm-hmm.
And when you introduce the dexterity element to that character, what it does is it doesn't necessarily change their thinking, but it changes the skill set they have access to, I think. And so if you have a character who's, pretty dexterity based, they're going to be someone who's going to be much more mobile, much more accurate with ranged weapons, just by nature of the rules of the system. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's going to change the way that they think on how to solve the problem. Like it changes the tools that are available, I guess. Whereas, kind of as KGB had said in chat, almost jokingly, when your fists are hammers, everything looks like a nail. If you are that strength-focused character, I guess, since hammers are the primary tool that you have, you're going to look for applications of those hammers in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my counterpoint to that is if you're playing a high intellect character who has low dexterity and low strength, you can still look for both of those solutions. But I guess if you're trying to solve a problem on your own, you're going to look for a non-conflict way to do it. I think a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
um, at least non-physical conflict,
Just throw lightning at it.
certainly an option. um, so have you ever played? So I guess this is a question for you. Have you ever played a low charisma face?
Um, yes, but only because the rest of the party had used charisma as their dump stat, and I had a 12.
So you were the face by kind of default, not because you were like intending to be especially good at it.
Yeah, I was the only one who could have a positive modifier on deception and or persuasion, so I kind of just got hamstringed into it.
Hmm. So I guess a question then for on the DM side of it, as DM,
Hmm.
how do you do social difficulty classes? Do you have the characters like in character argument influence the DC at all? Or do you, for like those social situations, the higher the level, you generally just set the DC at like 15, and whether they have a good argument or not, they still have to meet a pretty high difficulty class because this is a important story beat.
Um, I generally have the way the conversation is going influence DCs. Because, for example, one of my players got arrested,
Hmm.
and he tried to convince them to not arrest him
How'd that
when they
go?
had just watched him commit a crime. Attempted murder was the crime. Um,
It's a pretty big
and
one.
like, I could have set like a flat 25 DC, but like, the police watched him try to kill somebody, you know?
Hmm.
So like a flat DC doesn't really work because if he rolls a natural 20, that's that's a success. Plus 5 modifier natural 20, he convinces the police who just watched him try to kill somebody to not arrest him.
Yeah, or that it was justified, for instance, right?
Yeah, but like I'm not going to do that. These people just watched him unprovoked try to kill somebody.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
that'll.
a flat DC doesn't work in that situation, you know?
Yeah, I guess what I meant by like flat DC is, let's say we're running a social situation where you're trying to negotiate with somebody. like how much do you allow that character's in-character argument to influence the DC that you're looking for? So let's say going in before the conversation even starts, start of the session, you're thinking, okay, maybe as soon as the conversation starts, you get a number in your head. Okay, I'll probably need like a 20 or something here, DC.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're mid-level characters, so they're looking at like a 15 on the dice in order to hit it.
Sure.
And the character makes a really good argument in character. And maybe it's not even the face of the party, it's just a character who maybe just found themselves in the situation and they had a really compelling argument to make,
They
or
made a good point.
yeah, they made a really good point, and maybe it was one that you didn't even consider out of character that they just came
Mm-hmm.
up with. How far are you willing to lower that DC in order to make it attainable for that character who maybe doesn't have the high charisma modifier?
Um, I think that depends. I think 5 is a safe number to skew in either direction.
Hmm.
But sometimes I'll just be like, roll with advantage or something like that. Because, they made a good point that I didn't think of. Maybe they just, sound more convincing randomly.
Is there ever
But
any temptation to just give it to them even if they miss the DC?
sometimes, yeah, sometimes. I rarely give in to that temptation, but it's there.
um, so there is a point to some of these questions. So,
Sure.
small anecdote: I ran a Goblin Barbarian many years ago
Mm-hmm.
now, and I had like a 6 charisma or something. Like I literally ate rocks. Like I wasn't
Oh,
very
Lord.
bright. um, there was a point where like our reward was like brought out on a platter or whatever, and it was a bunch of jewels and stuff, and everyone's like, "Ooh, wow! Like these are really expensive," and my character thought they were the hors d'oeuvres,
Oh, Lord.
so I ate the reward. Um,
Jesus Christ.
I'm dumb as a brick, right? And I'm not good at social situations because I'm a bloody goblin, right? It's a Zendikar set campaign, and
Okay.
I became the party face.
Uh,
Because basically, like, even though I had a really low charisma, I had a way of kind of presenting those conversations in a way that made. Let me rephrase. I had the lowest charisma in the party on
mm-hmm.
sheets, but I had the highest personal charisma of the people at the table who are players. So
So you, Owen, had high charisma.
yeah, exactly. Um, and not to like rag on the people who I was playing with. They were both relatively new to role playing, so that was part of it
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, but also they just picked characters that were not like super good in social situations. I think one of them was like a core who like was on a vengeance quest, and the other one was like a warlock who worshipped like Ulamog or something. Like these are who was like the like shady loner who was like brooding in the background, and it's like all right, like you have Mister you have two loners basically, and then the goblin who's too stupid to know any better. Um, kind of in social situations. And so there was a number of situations that came up where like I was the one who was doing the primary negotiations, for one reason or another. I think one moment that stood out in particular was we were traveling and we became aware that there was a goblin ambush up ahead that was like attacking merchants and stuff.
mm-hmm.
So I went over there. I went over into the camp and I was like, "Hey man, like I'm with those guys that are coming down the street, but like you guys have a good thing going. Can I join in with you?" And so, I joined the other goblin team or whatever. They launched the ambush, and I buried a hatchet in the back of their leader's head.
Jesus.
Um, and like, that's what it was. Like those situations kind of came up where it's like, this is clearly like a pretty significant deception. I'm trying to convince these goblins that I, you know, am on their side when I very much intend to not be on their side at the very end. And it worked, like partly because the goblins are dumb, but also but like even despite that, like I have such a ridiculously low charisma. By all counts, it really shouldn't have, but I think partly the DM thought that it was a really novel solution to the problem, so
I
they were kind of
mean,
okay to go with it.
I mean, that's a decent solution. He also probably didn't think that the party would even try to talk to them. They would just find a way to kill them before the ambush. You know,
Right, right. Like we know where it is. Well, we'll just attack their position first. Like no.
or go around it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Um, so there was that. And I think through that it made me kind of feel that you don't really need a high charisma on your character sheet in order to end up as a significant player in the role play, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because even though you may put your foot in your mouth pretty frequently, you can still end up having a pretty forceful personality at the table.
Yeah.
And I think that as a player to some extent, you should really kind of bake that into your character building when you're thinking about it, and not lean too heavily on the idea that your stats define your character, because I don't think that they totally do.
Um, you know, uh, in the campaign we're in right now, I kind of split the face role with Ollie, and neither of us has particularly high charisma. But like, what are we gonna do? Let Dremis do it?
Yeah, well, I mean, funny that you mentioned that because Ollie does technically have the highest charisma in the party at a 19.
That's true, but how often does he get to use it?
Not frequently, although partly that's because the player hasn't been at the session um, when we have like those kind of conversational roles. Um, but I think that even like if you have like the 14 in your stats or whatever, you can still be an adequate face. Like I think it really just kind of depends if your DM is willing to play ball in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in that situation, like if I have a dick DM who wants the warlock to be the face, well then yeah, as soon as I go over there, the goblin's like they immediately recognize your intended treachery and they attack you. Like, all right, well, I guess that didn't work.
That's no fun.
No, it's not, but it just depends on your DM style and if they want to kind
Mm-hmm.
of encourage that kind of out of the box thinking. And I think that as a DM, it's important that we kind of let players know that it's okay that they can try that kind of stuff and not like significantly punish those kind of things, even if they're maybe not traditionally how their character would resolve a situation.
Um, yeah, I can agree with that. Um, but that also going into our other topic, sort of. Um, maybe that's how that character has shown themselves to solve those kinds of problems.
Mm,
Because even if I had a 10 in charisma, my character would definitely still be like, well, you see, you should do the talking with me because Arnon doesn't know what he's saying and Dremis doesn't like you.
yeah, or is outright just not engaged in the conversation. Um,
That too, but even when he is engaged in the conversation, 9 times out of 10, he doesn't like them.
yeah, I think that's fair. Kind of a surly character. Um, yeah,
Did
I
you
mean,
just say you're very charming
I did. Um, um,
and so humble?
I know. I just ooze with it. Um, should probably get that checked out. Um, so, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I think that the character's temperament definitely factors into those social situations. And yeah, kind of as you had mentioned, moving on to kind of our next, big talking point. How do you stay in character? I guess, when kind of met with that sort of, with situations that like maybe you as the player want to resolve, but shouldn't because that's not what your character would do or should do.
Well, you see, my character would do exactly what I want them to do because I am controlling the character. Um, but like, I kind of when I'm playing, and this is not an easy thing to do, but when I'm playing, I don't think what does Marvin want to do? I don't go what do I Marvin want to do? I go what does for example my current character, what does Gris want to do?
Mhm.
How does Gris think this problem should be solved? The correct answer is very rarely punch something for Gris.
Right.
Um but like Marvin wants to solve a lot of problems with punching. A lot of my problems in character right now would have been solved so much easier if I had just killed somebody.
So
So
like
many of them.
I'm running back in my head and I'm trying to think of like what situations in particular.
Like, Ralzeric wouldn't have been my problem anymore if I had just thrown lightning at him. Either he'd be dead or I'd be dead. Either way, he's not my problem anymore.
I guess it's good that I've been able to capture the smarminess to the point where you're thinking like, out of character, I really want to violence this guy's face. Um, um,
But like, Gris, when talking to the leader of his guild, the person who signs his paycheck, who is definitely stronger than him, isn't going to go, I have to throw lightning at this guy. He's going
right.
to go, I need to get him to believe whatever I have to say. However, I get him to believe it, just so he gets off my dick.
Yeah, I think that
And
makes a lot of sense.
like, we're 4 level 13 characters. Marvin knows that if the four of us rolled up on Ralzeric, there is a not zero chance he would die. It's not a great chance probably, but it's not zero. And that's the point Marvin gets. Like, if Marvin decided let's go kill Ralzeric, there's a chance it would happen. And none of Gris's problems would be Gris's problems anymore.
I think more importantly, like it wouldn't even be a particularly difficult conversation with the party because nobody like knows this guy from anything, and they like you in
Oh
character.
yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. They just, yeah, I'm down, let's roll.
Well, given that the last NPC that asked them to go kill some important member of government, they did basically without questioning the motive at all. I'd say that you have a very good chance of convincing them to do it if you merely asked.
I mean, even if I, had to convince them, he wants the MacGuffin that became an important plot device.
Mm.
Like, if I went, he's gonna steal it from you. You decided not to give it to him, he's gonna steal it from you. We gotta go kill him, otherwise he's definitely gonna succeed in stealing it from you. They'd be like, "Yep, okay, let's go."
It wouldn't even be particularly difficult, like I said. Like,
Like, that's it. Just, he's trying to steal it. He's not even waiting for the answer. He's gonna take it from you by force. We gotta jump
as soon as we get back,
him. So
um,
like, Marvin knows that that would be the fastest solution to most of Gris's problems. But Gris has to keep political correctness, and you can't see it, but I'm doing air quotes, for the world he lives in. So he can't just go, I need to kill this. And like, it's so hard to stay in that mentality, but you have to come up with thought patterns before you start playing the character to know how that character would think.
yeah, I mean, I don't think you necessarily even have to do it before you start playing the character, but I think while you're playing the character, it's really important to kind of keep some of those key life events in mind for
Mm-hmm.
influencing how your character would approach new situations. Which is why I think that like having a, it doesn't have to be like a super deep background, but backstory or whatever. But like having some sort of backstory you can draw on for how your character solves problems is really helpful. If you play a character who has, like a rough family life growing up, then, maybe has like a found family that they, had to leave for one reason or another, like
Mm-hmm.
that will probably influence the way that they form personal bonds with other people. Um, so for instance, I played a necromancer whose backstory is basically that she had to kill a lot of personal friends in order to escape a death trap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and swore vengeance on the people who put her in that situation. Like, okay, this is somebody who, came from a not great family situation, had a found family, had to kill that found family, and is now very upset with the people who made her do that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
blames those people, even though like she didn't technically have to kill anybody, she could have accepted the death, right? Um, like she could have accepted death or let one of them live instead, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so like there's obviously a lot of that, like that selfishness is definitely an undertone. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the belief that like underlying all of that is the core belief that like I am better than the people that were around me. Because I think that you have to think that at least a little bit in order to value yourself over the group like that. Um, I think that's part of it, and the other part is that this is somebody who's gonna be very hesitant to form new social bonds with people, who or because of that treachery in their life may be very slow to trust people, which can be really
Mm-hmm.
dangerous in a role play game. Just because like as a PC, if you do start there as a PC, I think you need to make it your business as the player to get over that in character at some point. Otherwise, I
Mm-hmm.
think it will hamstring your character's functionality within the party. Um, but like,
And development.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, right? Because like, you can't just be the loner character all the time, and you can't be the person who always keeps your cards too close to your chest.
Right.
Um, like, you have to confide in somebody at some point in time, because the thing is that if you have this really intricate and cool backstory, if you don't tell anybody at the table about it, nobody cares.
True.
um,
That's so true.
right? And I've had this problem with a couple of players in the current campaign that we're doing, where it's like for a huge amount of time, um, like
Cough, cough, Dremis, cough, cough.
even before Dremis, right? For a huge portion of time, Nick just wouldn't talk about his backstory with anybody, right? So that's our fighter sorcerer, because his character's backstory, as far as he understood it, was I killed somebody or nearly killed somebody, and I'm on the run from my hometown, and I really don't want people to find out where I am. Well, guess what? If you're on the run from your hometown, your sole motivation is going to be to not go back there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a good starting place for your role play. And if you're trying to run away from the thing, unless you're willing to confide in the other players at that table, nobody's going to know that. And if you never volunteer anything about your backstory, players are just going to stop engaging with you about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like when you're reading a book and you know that, or you're watching a movie or an anime or a drama or whatever, where like you watch that thing happen, and thus your interactions with the main character feel all that more tragic because you can see that there are these relationships that they're turning away. Um,
Yeah.
like that might be the tragedy that you're going for, but that's not going to be very engaging for the rest of the people at that table.
It also it doesn't give you a direction to go because while it lets you go anywhere with the character, you're aimless. You have nothing to aim towards. You have no particular goals outside of just don't go back to where I came from, you know? And
Yeah.
accomplished. You did it. You just don't go back. You just, one goal and you made it.
Mm. So, uh, do you do the same thing with NPCs? Like, when we're DMing, obviously we're playing a ton of different characters. For like important NPCs, do you try to get in character for those? For lack of a better way to put it.
I try to, for the most part. And one thing that I've started doing for a lot of NPCs that are important but aren't necessarily going to get a lot of quote unquote screen time
Hmm.
is I'll make the NPCs characters that I have already played.
Oh, okay.
Um, so like I already have a baseline personality for them. I know the basics of how that person thinks, and then since I'm the DM, I know that I can't use this character too much, but they make an impression while they're there because it's a character that I know in and out. You know?
Hmm. It's funny. I've never really liked doing that. Like, I don't think I've ever really considered using like old PCs or even like old NPCs to kind of like reinsert them into new settings. I think partly because the way that like my brain compartmentalizes those characters, they kind of exist in the setting that they were originally in. So like I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I would ever take like Erica from my Monday session and drop them in as an NPC in the Saturday game that I run. Because I think to me like Erica is so inextricably a part of the Forgotten Realms setting that I couldn't port her very effectively, I think, into a new setting because I think that like the way that I tend to build characters, I guess, is just very ingrained in the world that's around them. And so I don't tend to have like a baseline personality that I can move from place to place because the way that I would think about it is if I moved Erica out of Neverwinter's setting and into
Hmm.
our new one, and assuming that it's not the Forgotten Realms plane or whatever, um, it would just change her whole backstory because a lot of her backstory has to do with her relationship with her family as a half elf as nobles of Neverwinter, in addition to, the treachery behind that guild. And you can have that in other places, I guess, but to me, I don't know. Like obviously it's not like cheating because you're using your own work, but I guess to me, I never really considered doing that for a reason that maybe I'm having a hard time articulating.
I mean, so I get it, but again, I can only do it for characters that aren't going to be around for long. Because like Isaac Shadowfist, I played him for what 4 years, 5 years,
Yeah,
um,
something like that.
and like a lot of his character towards the end had to do with the fact that he was a clone and he had one friend who was an old Gungan.
Hmm.
Like that was a lot of his personality towards the end, um, and it was very influenced by his backstory and the things that led to where we were at the end.
Right.
But like I can take his core personality traits. He's kind of cocky um, until somebody's stronger than him. Then he'll back down. Um, he's not.
Cowardly almost, I guess, in that respect.
Yeah, he's kind of cowardly, um, but like he likes to show like he has power, even though he's aggressively medium as far as the power level of that campaign was.
Hmm.
Um, he's not above using dirty tactics. He's not above breaking the law. He's not. Um, he's very charismatic though. When he talks, you listen, even if he doesn't make any fucking sense, right?
Hmm.
So I can take those things and apply them to a person in a position of power who maybe shouldn't be, and name the character Isaac Shadowfist because why come up with a new name when I'm using the personality of a character that exists? Might as well use their name too if they don't already, you know, have a reason to be there.
Hmm.
And Isaac Shadowfist in my current campaign was in game maybe 45 minutes in total over the course of almost a year.
Hmm.
But like I could take somebody that already existed that I knew how to make them run, and the players didn't forget him. Like, and granted, part of that is that he's a plot hook now, but they never forgot that like the first session they met this high priest who was kind of a dick to them and just said, "Do this thing for me. I'll give you money, I guess." And then cowered when there was a god in his room.
Hmm.
Like they never forgot him, and it was easy for me to do that because it's a character that I know very deeply.
I think part of that too, though, is the idea of like an emotional connection to the players. Like, I think that like ultimately your NPCs, the important ones at least, you should make the players want to feel something. And I
Hmm.
think that if you can get your players to feel something when interacting with an NPC, that's when it's going to start to leave an impression. Because like nobody remembers like the fifth shopkeeper or whatever that they go to in town. You know,
No.
like most of the time they don't. But if they interact with that shopkeep and like he feels like a real charlatan, like this guy is
Hmm.
is trying to sell snow to an Eskimo, right?
Right.
And it's working. That guy is going to leave an impression. I did this.
Hmm.
It was great. Um, so so like when you run your characters, you can do that. You can do it by just kind of being aware of like mannerisms and things like that,
Hmm.
as well as kind of the personality and general approach. Just how if you're doing a player character. So, for instance, like this shopkeep, for instance, I want him to be a character that may show up again at one point or another. And he was known as the Gilligan, and he ran a shop, and he had the best swords around. He was the best smith in the capital. right?
Hmm.
And so they're like, all right, I want to go to the smith shop. And who do they get at the smith shop? Is it like some burly dude or whatever? Like, no, he's a surfer guy. He looks like a surfer. And he talks like one too. And you're like, all right, like, do you have any good swords? He's like, yep, every one I make. And it's like, okay. Like, I'm digging it. Like, no, I'm serious, man. Like, this thing, I'll cut right through you. Watch. Grabs a sword, does a quick cut demonstration. And he's like, so, what are you in the market for? And like, I really like turn up the salesmanship level where like now I'm using like actual sales skills that I have to try and sell them a sword. And like, they bought two long swords that they didn't need. um, like not at all. But like when they got the sword, they're like, all right, I'm gonna buy those two swords. They're like, all right, so like, what stats does it have? And it's like, it's just a long sword, dude. It's finely crafted. Like it's clearly like finely crafted. Like it looks like impressive artisanal work.
It is a well-made longsword.
It is a well-made longsword, and Ollie still has that sword, mind you. um, but like it had branding on it and everything, right? Like the name is
Hmm.
like stamped on the bottom of the pommel, right? So it's like, all right, actually, it's funny. You have one of those swords. Um,
Wild.
yeah, because he did have, I think, one magical sword that they did pick up, but like outside of that, you can really kind of make that character memorable because like they went back and like talked to him again after that, and they like tried to do a quest for him, and like he had some stuff that he was kind of considering, but basically the players were trying to take him for a ride, and he was like, "Why would I do that?" Um, the players rolled up. It's like, "Do you need us to like transport anything of yours?" He's like, I mean, not particularly. It's like, "You sure? Like we could take a bunch of your swords and like bring them somewhere." He's like,
Why
"What?
would I want that?
Why would I have a bunch of strangers take a bunch of my inventory somewhere?" So it wasn't great negotiations on the player's part, but the point that I'm trying to draw is that you can kind of take some traits and really kind of spin a personality around it and fill in
Hmm.
the blanks afterward. Why is this guy so affable? Why is he, this like well-renowned smith in town? I don't know any of that stuff when I make it up. I just pick a personality and go with it. And then I really try and leave that impression. In this case, the players just really like the guy, and like yeah, they got sold something, but that's something that like salesmen do. They make you like them.
Hmm.
Good salesmen, anyways. Likewise, I remember one of the first like major NPCs I put in a campaign when I was first DMing was a guy who was bring them somewhere. Yeah, exactly, Shinfitz. It's just like, what do you mean bring them somewhere? Like, where are you bringing them? Like, I didn't even ask for this. Why are we doing this? So I ran my first campaign, and I had like a captain of like a small like a military camp or whatever, and like he was an asshole. Like that was the character trait I was going with. He was a elf supremacist asshole, and so invariably when Bastion, who was playing in the campaign, um, he was playing a character who like made a snide comment under his breath. I rolled a listen check. He heard it. He's like, you know what? Seize that guy. And they seized and arrested his Bastion's character, and he was set to be burned at the stake the following day. So the players had to go rescue him. Um,
They shouldn't have done it. He deserved to be burned, and he's listening. So I want him to say something.
yeah, so that was the day that Jake Sparrow almost died at like level 2. But
Oh,
like,
so that was the day they almost caught Captain Jake Sparrow?
yes, except he was a dread necromancer, not a captain. But yeah,
Wow. Are you trying to say necromancers can't be pirate captains?
I'm saying that they are less effective.
You don't know that.
As a necromancer who was recently on a pirate ship, I can attest to that. I was less effective.
May I point you towards Captain Barbosa?
Captain Barbosa can go find a slimy one, I guess. Um,
He'd like it.
um, yeah, not talking about squid tentacles or anything like that. I think that that's you should aim to kind of elicit an emotion and shoot for that if you're trying to make a memorable NPC. So so it's like a cool game would be like if the players had to defend him in court, Sokka style. Yeah, I guess they could have tried to defend him in court. That particular NPC was not interested in due process and was more interested in killing the people who disrespected him. But yeah, that could definitely be really cool.
My kind of NPC.
Look, I'm just gonna burn this guy alive for disrespecting me. Like nothing more than that. He just disrespected me. Um, but yeah, I think like making an emotion and going with it is really important.
Fitz just quoted Avatar at us.
That he did. Um, yeah, and I think that like if you think back to like some of the NPCs that stick out to you the most, you'll find that a lot of times it's because there's something in there that endeared them to you or like made you feel a certain way.
Only Tup Tup.
And what was it that he made you feel?
Pride,
Pride?
sadness,
Well, sadness was probably at the
fear,
end.
fear. I wouldn't have remembered Tup Tup if he didn't die the way he did. I promise.
Do you want to share that story? Because people who are watching probably don't know it.
Oof. All right, so the year is 2012. Our dear esteemed Owen is running a Star Wars Saga Edition campaign.
Sword Art Online is a new show.
Sword Art Online is a new show. It is not yet tainted by the fairy dance arc. All right. Owen builds a dungeon. It is a whole planet. Planet is just one big dungeon, and we have to get to the core of the planet and find the magic MacGuffin thing, force magic, blah blah blah. Right?
Hmm.
We go in, and we had before we left, we hired some NPCs to help us out. Some demolitions guy, um, two other people. I don't even remember what they did, and this Gungan martial artist named Tup Tup. That tells you how memorable the other three were. I don't know any of their names, and I don't even remember what two of them did. All right.
I remember them crystal clear. I want you to know that.
Of course you do. You cared about them.
I cared about three of them.
I didn't care about any of them until we're almost at the bottom of the dungeon. We're almost at the core of the planet, right? We just have to get in this elevator, and we should be at the last floor, right?
Uh,
And
yeah, I think it was like two floors to go. I think after that, but this was like one of the last major floors.
we thought it was the next floor, and that's what mattered.
Right, right.
So we're in a big room. No, Fitz, Tup Tup, Tup. But nice reference.
I mean,
Um,
honestly, I should have, given that it was a martial artist. Um, would have made would have made the character that much better, but alas.
anyways, big room. We enter through one door. There's an elevator on the other side, right? Seems easy. Room gets flooded with giant monster things, right? And we had seen these monster things before. It took us, the whole party to beat one of them, and there's like four of them now. So Tup Tup effectively says, "Get to the elevator. I'll hold him off and meet you there." And we're running. We're going. We're fighting them off as best we can. And Tup Tup is mostly running with us, but we get there and we push the button. We're like, Tup Tup, come on, we gotta go. And he says, if I stop, they'll get in the elevator and get you. And the doors close right as Tup Tup is about to meet one of them head on. And Tup Tup definitely died there. And I'll never forget that Tup Tup sacrificed himself for us. Rip Tup Tup.
R.I.P. Tup Tup.
And then, I said some stuff that I can't say on stream.
Yeah, Tup Tup did too. So uh, yeah, and if I recall correctly, I believe you got to watch him get violently disemboweled as the elevator was going down.
We saw the first like contact. We didn't see anything after that. Like there was a stab into him, and then the doors shut.
Right, right. I think I did describe the disembowel, but I don't think the characters saw it.
Exactly. Which
Dude,
was rude, by the way.
I mean, rude killing the character, I guess. Um, but like that actually, funnily enough, like I did feel somewhat bad about it, but it was almost like a course correction in a way. Um, shut up, man. To at least let you know that Rocky loves Emily. I'm sure that Rocky did. Um, that movie, man. Um, but like Tup Tup's death was partially like a course correction in a way
Sure.
because he like far outdamaged the rest of the party. Like as an
Mm-hmm.
NPC in the group, he was a problem because his damage output was so significantly higher than the rest of the already high-powered party that I did need something that was believable as a means to kind of
Mm-hmm.
remove him from the party. Otherwise, he would trivialize, or worst case scenario, steal the thunder of any potential final encounter that you would have deeper in the
Mm-hmm.
dungeon. So, for a good, I want to say 2 floors, I was looking for a way that was like believable for him to
Mm-hmm.
not make it. And during that time, of course, there was like nonsense going on the entire time. He was a funny, adorable character. Um, that largely showed up and kicked the shit out of stuff and then made a couple of one-line jokes,
Mm-hmm.
but given that of the group of npcs you hired, he was the only one who made it past like the second floor,
Yep.
and at that he made it like really deep into the floor, after what I think was a fairly memorable introduction to the party in the first place. um, I mean, I guess you can tell me if you think it was memorable if you remember it. uh,
Nope.
um, So I think that like for me it was like, well shit, I've introduced an NPC into the party that doesn't have a doesn't make sense for them to leave at this point. Like they can't. Like they're on a planet with no atmosphere, like 5,000 feet underground or whatever. Like where are they gonna go? um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Nearly died getting to where they are. They'll never make it back alive on their own. So I need a way to kind of remove this character in a way that is believable. So that way, when we do get to the final fight at the bottom of that dungeon, that he doesn't make the fight about him dealing the damage. Or worst case, if he dies during the final fight, that almost takes away some of the emotional weight of what that fight was trying to do. Because
Mm-hmm.
like I know that there's a giant betrayal coming at the end. If the giant betrayal happens and he kills Sid, but then kills Tup Tup afterwards, the fight almost becomes more about killing Tup Tup in some respect, or at least it shares some of that limelight that I really wanted to rest on the captain's death for that
Mm-hmm.
fight. So, kind of keeping that emotional weight in mind with what I was going for, I did need to find a way to do it. And so in this case, a heroic sacrifice, like I could make it happen, and you guys have encountered enough like really dangerous monsters in the dungeon to where running away was an appropriate response given the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was kind of the impetus behind. I don't know if you guys realized that at the time, that's why I really needed Tup Tup to go away, um, as the
I,
players.
I kind of guessed, but I wasn't too worried about it either way. I was just sad that he was dead.
It's like, oh man. Um, so I guess question: did that bother you more than the PC death later on in the dungeon?
No, um, because in character, I didn't like Tup Tup. In character,
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot.
but the player death was my character's oldest friend in the party,
Mm,
and his oldest friend ever actually, besides the NPC captain.
mm,
Um, so like. in character, that one really hurt, and that affected how I felt about it out of character, if that makes sense.
So allowing your character's feelings to influence your personal feelings about the matter.
Yeah,
King Flink says, by the way, that he loves killing party favorite NPCs. We
we
know.
know, we know.
This
Uh,
is not news.
Soto
Um,
Kaiba said he never met Tup Tup, but if he did, he would kill everyone hurting him and then himself.
Honestly, like, I feel like that's an appropriate response. He was great. Um,
Honestly, Tup Tup would kill everyone hurting you,
uh, including yourself if you tried to harm yourself.
especially yourself.
Um, so I guess for the people who are listening, the initial introduction of that character was I'm responding to the bulletin board that you put out looking for people. Okay, what do you do? I know 14 forms of Gungan martial arts, and I'm a master in each one of them. DM, can I do a knowledge check? Are there 14 kinds of Gungan martial arts? You rolled like a 7 or something, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
to the best of your knowledge.
Oh, I totally forgot about that. That's
That's
good.
I remembered that because that I always found that was hilarious because like the question of like, are there 14 kinds? Like, I didn't even consider that you would question that, so I was like, yeah, yeah, he's telling the truth. This
It's
guy.
because out of character, I know that there aren't 14, and my character was like the know-it-all. I had to roll a 1 on that knowledge check to not get it, basically.
Yeah. So it's like I don't know what this guy's all about, but like he looks physically strong, so like sure we'll put him in. Um, you're hired. Um, so yeah, I think that like having really memorable NPCs is really helpful. J.R. Martin over here. Yes, exactly. It's exactly that, Shinfitz. And I hate every minute of it. Um, I do think it's important not to kill every important NPC though. Like I do think it's healthy to have a few that are like not safe necessarily, but relatively safe. Um, because I think if you do that, it does make the sporadic deaths a little bit more impactful.
Oh, absolutely. I haven't actually killed an NPC yet, at least in my current campaign.
Any idea for front runners that you can talk about, or are too many of your players watching?
Um, I have a very clear front runner, um, and I'm not going to say who it is just in case they watch the VOD or the video on YouTube.
I see.
But I'm pretty sure I know who the first one I'm going to kill will be.
And when you're planning on killing an NPC, do you often think of like the circumstances of that character's death, or do you just kind of put them in dangerous situations, and if they die, they die?
Oh yeah, I don't like pointless deaths for NPCs. Um, I feel like if it's not an active antagonist, it should probably serve a purpose.
Hmm. So, like, purpose isn't like furthering the plot of the story, or like,
Furthering the plot, furthering somebody's character development, um, even just like changing up the status quo on purpose.
mhm.
Because just putting an NPC in a dangerous situation and then they die doesn't necessarily change anything. Um,
Like
but
if it's the high priest Isaac Shadowfist, and then just like his disciple takes over, and he's
yeah,
less of a dick.
yeah, like that doesn't necessarily change anything. Just having somebody else take over as the high priest, right?
Mhm.
And that's what would happen because there's an order of succession, and the party doesn't necessarily like Isaac Shadowfist because he is an asshole. So they'd probably just like the new guy more, honestly. In fact, they do like the new guy more because I know who that is. I know who the next in line to take over that temple is, and they do like that person more.
Well, I guess you should probably not let them know that because then they might just kill Isaac Shadowfist anyways.
Oh, I mean, they can't.
Well, they can try.
They're
Um,
level 6. He's level 20. Pathfinder 2E cares too much about levels.
That's funny. You know, I don't actually typically level my NPCs like linearly. Um,
That's fair.
like a lot of times I just kind of start assigning values. Um, King Flink says, half of mine were planned, but one of the best happened because a player chose to stop an enemy rather than save the NPC. Same session. Party lost a major NPC because of Lutai.
Oh, Lutai.
I feel like everybody loses when he plays. Um,
Yeah, I don't miss having him in games at all.
yeah, I think this is probably a good time to segue into the idea of having toxic people in your group and the importance of being willing to prune those people out of the group in order to make a better role playing experience overall for the rest of the people involved.
I mean, yeah, we can talk about that for the last 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't want to completely derail us because I did actually want to ask a little bit about how you go about creating personalities for your player characters and kind of like things that you do to actually like stay in character, which was the thing that we were supposed to talk about. Um,
I mean, we can save the toxic player conversation for another time.
I think we can. Yeah. Um,
Um, so yeah, um, honestly, NPCs, I kind of just improv.
mhm,
I improvise everything, and then like what I'm doing, I take notes about things that I say, mannerisms that I used, um, and sometimes even like inflection and tone if I think it's relevant.
mhm.
I'll write down a few words for NPCs that are gonna come back. Um, but I largely just improv NPCs that I don't already have a plan for.
I see. Kind of just like taking a prompt and just kind of going with it, and then
Hmm.
afterwards, if you feel that NPC is going to come back up again later on, you just kind of make a couple of notes on what are some of the character traits you did develop, and then bring those back up later on if you see the person.
Yeah, basically.
Shinfitz here asked, how do we handle players dying? Do they get revived? Do we do permanent deaths for players? Um,
It
so
depends.
yeah, it depends on the tone of the story and kind of the system and setting in a lot of ways too, right?
And what the players are capable of, and yeah, there's a lot of factors that affect this question.
Yeah. I think in general, as a DM, you should be okay with your character, with like your player characters dying, but I think you should seldom aim for that to be the goal.
Hmm.
Um,
I can agree with that, unless you're purposely running a meat grinder style campaign where um, players are expected to have two or three backup characters because they are expecting their player to die frequently.
mhm.
Unless that's what you're doing, your goal shouldn't usually be to kill players. It should be to make a solid challenge, and if they die, then you roll with it. You figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I will say that I am less likely to purposefully allow a PC to die if the fight or situation itself is not sufficiently important.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if it's just like a random mob or whatever, I'm much more willing to like fudge the numbers in their favor during those situations,
Mm-hmm.
in order to avoid pointless or seemingly meaningless character deaths for players specifically. NPCs, I'll
Sure.
do it. NPCs, if they die in a random skirmish, like, so be it.
Right.
But if it's a sufficiently important moment, it is what it is. Um, I will say that I've never actually killed a PC, so that does come with a grain of salt. The closest I've ever come is I did disintegrate Dustin's NPC PC character like a year and a half ago, but for the purpose of the story and because I did feel bad about it, I did allow that character to be basically reborn as a planeswalker and become an NPC at that point. The intention was to eventually allow them to. Oh, I did kill John's character in Sagas. That's true. Um,
You did kill John. I cared about that. We were
uh,
just talking
we were
about
just talking about that. I was thinking D&D, right?
it.
So so yeah, like in that situation, I did allow the character to kind of be reborn, and the player was at the time considering resuming playing that character later on.
Hmm.
Um, but we've moved past that at this point. It's just going to be an NPC. I did kill John's character, and that was an interesting experience because, as it turns out, his character shouldn't have died. Um, because he forgot he could delay damage because of his character ability and never took a second
Oof.
wind. Um, and he also didn't use his destiny point to stabilize. So, so in sagas, it's really hard to kill player characters. But we forgot all that stuff, and his character died, and we didn't realize it until like 2 sessions later. Um, like, or it was a session afterwards or whatever, and like we kind of did a
Hmm.
whole big thing where your character got like a big character moment afterwards. So I think we collectively kind of agree that that would be a fair send off for the character. I think it's
Yeah.
important that if your player character is dying, you do want to give that player kind of their send off, right?
Hmm.
Um, you can consider kind of giving them a moment to like have last words or attribute some meaning to their character's death. Particularly if you know that like maybe it's a low level campaign at the time and they don't have the
Hmm.
means to bring the character back to life, that can be a big deal too. If you have a party of a wizard and 2 fighters, that shit's for keeps. Like I don't know how else to
Yep.
put it. Um, which would be a really hard party comp to kind of manage. Um, but yeah, so I think that that's part of it too. But I think that as a DM, you should be comfortable killing players, not on purpose, but if it's not your express goal to kill a bunch of characters, then I think that you should be more willing to kind of fudge the numbers because these are players put a lot of energy and emotional energy and investment into their PCs. So I don't think it's
Hmm.
particularly good form to kill them on a regular basis. And if they are going to die, you want that player to feel happy with that character send off. What you don't want is for that player to show up after having missed a week and it's like, oh yeah, we killed your character.
Yeah.
Oh, how'd they die? Oh, your character was monologuing and the bad guy just shot a fireball at you and you died.
Which bad guy? Oh, that guy over there.
Hmm. Or, even better, your character joined the evil side, so he killed you. DM horror stories. We'll get to those another episode. Um, so do you have any tips for staying in character while you're playing the game?
Um, Putting a lot of conscious thought into the way you're talking and acting.
Hmm.
Um, because it's not easy to be in character. Like there's a reason that actors are actors, right? Because they're expected to stay in character for significant periods of time. And anyone can learn it, but not everyone knows it.
Hmm.
You know, and a lot of what it is for those of us without professional training is just being intentional with the things we say and how we say them and the way we move. You know, um, and that requires thinking more about it than you normally would, and also asking yourself, what does my character think about this? What does my character want to do? Not what do I want to do? What does my character want to do? And if you play a character long enough, that can eventually turn into what do I want to do? And you are thinking as that person. But until that point, you have to actively think about the character instead of yourself.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good tips, I think. One thing too is that when you're trying to think up your character's personality, try to base it off of a nugget of some aspect of your own personality, at least at first. It can be really jarring sometimes if you want to try and jump into a personality type that is very far removed from how you normally conduct yourself. So
Hmm.
sometimes picking something that's a lot closer, or maybe is just similar to you but emphasizes an aspect of your personality, um, can help a lot with trying to kind of keep that in order. Um,
Yeah.
so, like for
Um,
instance, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say for newer players, sometimes it is best just to role play yourself, even if you change nothing,
Mhm.
because that's at least a character you can stay in. What would I do in this situation? Well, I, Marvin, would not assault the police officers.
Yeah, and I
You
think that's a
know.
really big departure from like playing a video game, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Because like when you're playing a video game, you're kind of removed from the avatar, and your decisions don't really have consequence. Whereas
Right.
when you're playing like a tabletop role playing game, the idea is that you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of the character within the game universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really unusual for someone to like assault somebody unprovoked.
Yeah.
Even if it's for like monetary gain, right? Um, so I think that keeping that in mind can be really helpful. And I think that's kind of why like murder hobos get kind of the bad rap that they do. Um, just because most people in the real world would not associate with someone who willingly chooses murder as the primary solution method. Period. like like that person's dangerous. I don't want to be around you.
Most people also, aren't going to be like that in a world with laws, right? Like,
Mm,
even if the only law is don't kill people, most people aren't actively going to just start murdering people the way most murder hobos do.
right, right. One thing I did want to touch on though, while we still have some time left, is I I don't think it's actually important to be in character all the time. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
like what I mean by that is that like when you're playing the game itself, like interacting with NPCs, I think you should try make an effort to remain in character. But I do think it's important to allow yourself to kind of relax and joke around at the table without like feeling bad about it, right?
Oh yeah.
I think it's okay too. Like if your character makes a comment that is strictly outside of the purview of the character's knowledge for like joke purposes. Um, so like for instance, like making a pop culture reference in character that is not possible, right? Like, oh wow,
Mm-hmm.
that really, what song are you playing? Like, oh, I'm playing, Hey There, Delilah.
Wonderwall.
Yeah, I'm playing Wonderwall, right? That's the song I'm playing on the guitar. Like, there's no reason that Wonderwall should exist, but it does now, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like, oh, I've heard of those. Those are kind of like muskets, I think, right? Like, didn't they have those in some large scale warfare, like World War, perhaps? You know, like sometimes you can make veiled like references to real life, but I think what's important is like as the
uh,
DM, like don't sweat it. Like if someone's sitting there having fun in your campaign, don't rain on their parade. Let them have fun. I think you should encourage them to roleplay in character periodically, but lighten up. If at the end of the day the players walk away from the table and they had a good time, even if they didn't necessarily engage with every aspect of your story seriously, I think that you still did the right thing. And I think that at the end of the day, we should be more concerned with the people having fun at the table rather than the players experiencing the story the way that you intended it.
yeah, I can agree with that. Um, as long as the thing, everybody needs to have fun in D&D. It's a collaborative game. You're telling a story together.
Mhm.
So if not everybody is enjoying themselves, somebody is doing something wrong, and there should be some steps taken to correct that. You know,
Yeah, and I
and
think. Go ahead.
and the story the DM is trying to tell isn't always the be all end all, because maybe the players don't care about your story. Honestly, like that just happens sometimes. Sometimes the side character that you didn't intend to matter is so much more entertaining to them,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
like you kind of just have to roll with it and see what happens.
yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that when you do get more comfortable, kind of thinking on your feet, you can use those side characters to kind of shepherd the party back to what you wanted to do, anyways. And
Mm-hmm.
that can be better. But I think ultimately, as a DM, your primary goal shouldn't be telling the story. It should be ensuring that everybody at the table is having a good time. And if someone isn't, then I think at that point you need to start to diagnose, why is it that
Yeah.
this player is maybe has a player type that is just not compatible with the rest of the group. Totally possible. Am I doing
Mm-hmm.
something wrong? Am I trying to force the players to play the game that I want to play? Um, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into that. But I think that, for that reason, if you're playing at the table and you're getting bent out of shape because somebody is, making jokey references or whatever, like just let them. Let them. They're
Mm-hmm.
having fun, and that's what you're there for.
I agree. Absolutely.
So, wow. Okay. So that was the thing. and we're rolling up right at the end here. Any parting thoughts?
um, Rip Tup Tup.
R.I.P. Tup Tup. I can respect that. Um, for me, I guess parting thoughts would be, you know, if you're DM, spend time, spend time thinking about your character as a character, as a person, and kind of what motivates them, and use that to inform your decision making. I think that'll go a really long way towards making your NPCs a lot more believable.
Yeah,
So
and if all else fails, just be yourself.
yeah, super super like tried and true method. If you are a new role player, just play you. Play yourself faithfully, and you will never have a problem. And important to note, do not play yourself playing a video game. Or do not play yourself playing a game. Play yourself.
Hmm.
And as a new DM, if you ever want to challenge your players like truly to like get in character, role play a game set in the universe that you're like set in the real world, and have the players
Hmm.
play themselves. um, I did that one time, and it was hilarious. Hilarity ensued when you isekai your entire player group.
I reverse isekai a player group. Well, it was still isekai technically, but they were fantasy characters, and I brought them to our world.
That's wonderful. Do they get jobs at McDonald's?
No, they were murder hobos, so they got arrested and then got shot.
That's unfortunate.
They broke the law.
Was this Judge Dredd?
No, they got arrested and then they tried to break out, and then they assaulted some police officers, and cops weren't having it.
As they do. As they do.
Uh, Soto, isekai is the genre of anime where a character is pulled into another world. Think ReZero, Sword Art Online, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It is a fairly common genre nowadays.
Digimon.
Digimon is an isekai, yes. Um, one
I
of the
didn't realize
first.
that until last year.
Yeah, it is one of the first. Um, but yeah, so I think that's pretty big. Yeah, kind of like high level thought. I think that's kind of a good place to start. And
Hmm.
just sometimes just like lean on tropes. Like that can be really effective too for just like generating a personality out of nowhere. Really.
Yeah,
So
read some manga, you non-weeb. The
yeah.
thing is, he is a weeb.
So I think I guess one other thing too, which I guess I wanted to mention I guess before, becoming familiar with a lot of different like character archetypes in media definitely helps. Having
Hmm.
a wider kind of breadth of media to pull from and characters to be familiar with really does
Hmm.
help. So that if you roll up into a party and you need to come up with, some sort of like barbarian type, like yeah, there's like a few different like stereotypical barbarians that you could play. You can play like Conan the Barbarian, Xena, Warrior Princess. Like those are some like
Hmm.
stereotypical. I don't even know if Xena's really technically a barbarian, but you could roll that character as one, for instance. Um,
Sure.
or if you need like a ranger or something, there's like Legolas type ranger characters,
Hawkeye,
Hawkeye, Aragorn, right?
Green
Um,
Arrow.
Green Arrow, you know, or you could play like Dar from the Beastmaster, right? Like characters that like your players, He-Man, for instance. So like having a wide like variety of different like developed characters, for lack of a better word, to pull from can also be really helpful. And I'm not saying that
Hmm.
you literally need to put He-Man in your campaign, but you can be familiar with his character traits enough to be able to put some of those into the character.
Yeah.
Um, you don't need to have literal like Lion O showing up in your campaign as the leader of the Thundercats. It could just be a Tabaxi leader who's just on the younger side or is very impulsive and immature, and that could be your tabaxi leader for that group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like that in of itself could be kind of the nugget of a personality that you could build on. Your players run into the most masculine name ever, He-Man. Yes. Um, so like that's an option for sure. And then if you want to do something different, subvert those expectations. So maybe the leader of the Tabaxis is really young, but he's wise beyond his years. You're doing the anti-Lion-O, right?
Sure.
Um, so those can also be really helpful for trying to like improv or generate personalities out of nowhere, particularly if the players are like, I want to engage with the guy who's sitting at the bar over there.
Mm-hmm.
Because like suddenly you might have just made up the guy on the spot. And it's like, yeah, you see an elephant looking guy sitting in the corner. It looks like he might be drinking some mead or something. And it's like, I want to go talk to the elephant man. And it's like, uh, okay, sure. He glances at you and looks somewhat annoyed that you're approaching him, perhaps reflecting that you as the DM are annoyed. So, what you drinking there, fella? Mead. It's like, all right, we already have something. We have a guy who is drinking and he is not excited to engage with conversation. He's clearly there, for his own reasons, right? And then if the players press that, okay, well, maybe they'll tease out, why it is that he's drinking. Maybe he just got off of work and he's really tired and he kind of just wants to have his meat and go home, right? Or maybe he's been there all day and he's really quite drunk. But
Norm.
so so yeah, man. That's kind of what I got for you.
It was good.
All right, so I guess with that, we'll just go ahead and wrap it up for today. For those of you who are watching, thank you so much. We really do appreciate the support. If you're on YouTube, you can catch these broadcasts live Thursday at 9 o'clock Eastern, 9 p.m. Eastern. Um, I'm Owen, of course. I'm at twitch.tv/Vladdviever, link in the description. And he is Marvin. Where can we find you?
Twitch.tv/Tayogetsu.
Link is also in the description. You can also catch us on Twitter. Handles are the same as the Twitch handles, so easy to find. And yeah, if you're watching this on Twitch, you can catch all the old broadcasts on my YouTube channel /Vladdviever. So with that, if you're interested, you can join the Discord channel. We have that set up now, so if you want to guest in a future episode or talk to us directly about D&D or role-playing stuff, if you want our advice or just want to, hang out, let us know. You can chat us up in the Discord, and if you have an interesting thing you want to talk about, you can find yourself on the show.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Until next time, peace.
Deuces.